Friends, welcome back. In the final stages of the war in Western Europe, German units faced an enemy very different from those they had fought before. The battles against the Americans revealed clear and repeating patterns, so consistent that the Wehrmacht began compiling detailed field reports. These documents were not written for propaganda or ideology. They were written for survival. What you are about to hear is a reconstruction of those conclusions, based on real combat experience. The defining feature of combat against American forces was the overwhelming use of material superiority. Tanks, artillery, and air power were not used selectively, but massively. Before and during every advance, American units relied on heavy artillery and mortar fire, often combined with airstrikes. Any detected movement immediately triggered fire. The battlefield itself became hostile long before the infantry appeared. German observers quickly noted that American tanks were poorly suited for fighting in terrain with limited visibility. Forests, hedgerows, bushes, broken ground. These environments caused hesitation and caution. Above all, American tank crews feared close-range anti-tank weapons, especially the Panzerfaust and the Panzerschreck. Any terrain suspected of hiding such weapons was either avoided or saturated with fire. In areas with poor visibility, American tanks fired continuously, using all available weapons until they believed that nothing living remained. Only after that would they advance slowly, under close infantry protection. This behavior was predictable, and the report emphasized that predictability could be exploited. German units were instructed to occupy terrain that limited observation. Small bushes followed by open ground were considered ideal. Positions directly on the forward edge of vegetation were strictly forbidden. If a slope without cover had to be defended, soldiers were ordered to dig in below the crest, as deep as possible, and to avoid linear formations. Positions had to be staggered, never aligned. Every opportunity to deploy anti-tank guns was to be used, regardless of how limited the space appeared. American artillery was described as relentless. Any movement, no matter how small, was answered with heavy fire. Many German casualties occurred not during combat, but because soldiers left their cover to collect water, to move supplies, or due to momentary inattention. The conclusion was uncompromising. All daylight movement had to be forbidden. Absolute discipline was essential. One careless soldier endangered the entire position. The report also identified behavioral patterns in American operations. On quiet sections of the front, U.S. forces often observed periods of silence at nearly the same time each day, usually around midday. German units were instructed to shift unavoidable activities into these windows: communication, reconnaissance, resupply, and movement. American attacks almost never occurred early in the morning. Instead, they were typically launched in the early afternoon. The recommendation was clear: use the morning hours to reinforce defenses, observe enemy positions, and prepare fire plans based on what was seen. American attacks followed recognizable signs. Smoke screens appeared on the flanks and directly in front of the target position. Certain sectors went silent for long periods, sometimes marked only by signal flares. Fire positions were never to be placed on isolated high ground. Instead, they had to provide full observation of the entire approach. Pre-planned artillery and mortar fire was considered essential, refined continuously based on combat experience. In attack, American infantry behaved cautiously outside prepared positions. According to the report, even relatively weak defensive fire often caused them to halt or withdraw. The instruction to German units was simple: fire continuously, especially from the flanks. When smoke appeared, the entire area was to be shelled, even with limited visibility. American units repeatedly attacked the same positions using the same methods, even after multiple failures. In defense, American troops were more resilient, but still avoided close combat whenever possible. Night operations were described as their greatest weakness. For American soldiers, the war largely ended after midnight. Maneuvers stopped. Units withdrew deeper into their defenses and slept. Forward security and observation were weak. Although guard dogs, trip flares, and cleared zones were used, the report emphasized that American sentry discipline was poor. As a result, infiltrating American lines at night was often surprisingly easy. Assault groups operating between midnight and dawn could achieve significant success if they moved quietly and struck suddenly. Previously lost positions could often be retaken under cover of darkness. Reconnaissance was emphasized repeatedly. Day and night patrols were essential, and even long-range reconnaissance units could be reduced in size without losing effectiveness. Assault groups were required to carry Panzerfausts at all times. Urban combat was to be avoided when possible, and great caution was advised near civilian areas. Breaking contact with American forces was described as relatively easy, since their pursuit was limited and cautious. The greatest remaining threat was American air power. Fighter bombers and attack aircraft posed constant danger. The only reliable countermeasures were immobility, dispersion, and camouflage. Anti-aircraft weapons had to change positions frequently, as American pilots avoided areas that had fired on them in previous days. Dense formations were strictly forbidden. Vehicles were required to move with dedicated air observers, preferably in open trucks, constantly searching for cover. Any non-essential movement had to be postponed until nightfall. This report does not praise German strength, nor does it mock the enemy. Instead, it reveals how the Wehrmacht analyzed its opponent, identifying habits, patterns, and weaknesses in order to survive against overwhelming firepower. It is a cold, methodical look at how war is actually fought, not in theory, but in brutal reality.